Welcome to the Faith in Real Life podcast. I am your pilot, Nat Crawford, and I am here with the other pilot in this plane, Dan Koch. Dan, what's happening, brother? How are the friendly skies?
The friendly skies are great. I think I'm more of a stewardess, though. Or what would a male version of a stewardess be? Like a steward?
A steward. I think,
Steward.
yeah, we our family vacation's coming up here, and I was just changing a flight. They changed our flight for us, and so we get a free change. And so anyway, I was kind of reflecting on that. And now they don't call them stewards; they call them flight attendants. So gender neutral
Okay.
and gender fluid. So it's all the
And
above.
gender fluid.
Checks all the
Yeah.
above.
Can
Yep,
you imagine that, though? Me bumping into everyone, trying to squeeze through those tiny
dude,
aisles on an airplane.
you would be the most beefy of a hunk steward I've ever seen on a flight, and you'd probably get a lot of good tips. That's for sure.
Hey,
Yeah,
scoot over.
dude. I was just thinking about this. If you were to sit in a cockpit, you would take it up the whole thing, right? I'd have to sit in Dad's lap in order to
Hey,
fly the plane.
well, you're making it sound like I'm obese.
No, not at all.
According to my BMI, I am, though.
You're
But
solid, dude.
yeah, I took my kids to Worlds of Fun a couple years ago, and my daughter was convinced that I needed to ride every roller coaster with her.
Huh?
And I kept noticing that it was so uncomfortable. I was not enjoying it, not because I was freaked out by the roller coasters, but it was because I couldn't sit square in the seats with the
Right?
bar down. I was always sitting sideways on one hip, and I was like, I can't keep doing this. I got to drive back home.
Well, this is where I'm guessing like BMI. This has been an interesting discussion with people about, like body mass index. BMI, I mean, I'm no doctor, I'm no scientist, but it doesn't seem like it's a very good indicator of a person's health, because you could be 6'9", 120 pounds, you're going to look terrible. And you could also be, your height of what, 6'2", and what, 250. No, you're not that big, but
No, not 6'2", about 5'11", 6 foot, but I am about 260.
oh my goodness.
Yeah,
But so BMI would probably say you need to lose some weight.
it would. It would.
Um, sorry, just got a random text message. Let's see, hon.
It's all right, man. It's all right. Duty calls.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so funny thing about BMI, life insurance hates my BMI and my heart rate, my pulse. So on paper, it looks like I'm getting ready to kill over and die because my
Right.
pulse is so low and slow. But it's because I train, right? It's because of the athletic performance and background. And
Right.
so I'm actually well conditioned, but the paperwork says I'm horribly conditioned. And so they like to try to give me a really bad rating until they kind of look more into my background.
Right. Yeah. And that's funny, but even then they'd still, again, just on the flat diagnosis, it's like, nah, this guy's probably not the healthiest. But then when you see it, you're like, wow, all right, specimen, Apollos. So let's get to chatting. So our main topic we want to talk about today is sermon prep and what goes into a message. And part of this spawned from a conversation I had with somebody else, and I was just at a conference. But before we get there, one of the big topics, I guess, I don't think this is even a hot topic for Christians alone. I think it's for people who are watching in the culture, Christians, and what's happening. But it's the whole Michael Tate thing with Newsboys. For those of you who don't know, Newsboys is a Christian band, been around for, I think, I don't want to say 40 years, probably what, 30, I mean, that's 30 years, 25, 30 years. I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, but their lead singer was in DC Talk. And, what's interesting about DC Talk is you've got Toby Mac, who is still performing, still following Jesus. The third guy, who no one ever remembers his name, he ended up dropping out and falling away from the faith, deconstructing his faith. And then you have Michael Tate, who's taken the lead role in the Newsboys, which is, I'd say, a fairly successful Christian worship rock band. But recently it came out accusations of him having some type of inappropriate experiences with men. And then Michael actually came out with what looked like a very sincere apology, and recognizing his failures: drug use, alcohol abuse, and then inappropriate relationships with people. And so the question, we were talking before that we hit record, like, hey, if we were just having a coffee and we brought this up, what would our conversation be like? And so that's really what this is about. Like, how do you respond to a person like Michael Tate or anyone else who's a leader, a Christian influencer who sins and then falls from grace? Like, what's your gut reaction to this?
Well, I'll say from the start that it wasn't great news, right? You know, from the Newsboys. Sorry, I may have been a little insensitive there.
Yeah.
Not great news there in terms of
Yeah.
what happened, but gut reaction is more of being grieved by just the way that industry can kind of lend itself to creating those kind of opportunities for people to indulge in sin, to hide it, and to remain in bondage and in shame to it for a long period of time. So there's a you grieve for that because you know my I think that most people enter into that pursuit thinking that they really do want to encourage, build, and uplift the body of Christ. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, when this thing broke, that's not what happened.
Yeah.
A lot of people were shocked and hurt by it. And so that's where, for me, like grief, a little bit like grieved, a little bit like, oh man, um, you know, you don't want to hear that. It's not like I turn on the news or scroll social media looking for those kind of stories.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, the whole grieving people's sin, and I think obviously he is. I mean, I don't know the guy from anybody else, but so you can only read what a statement says. But it's been interesting because when this came out, pretty quickly after, you had radio stations saying we're not going to play Newsboys anymore. And
Mm.
then I just saw today that their record label has dropped the Newsboys, and then on top of it, you've got now venues canceling the Newsboys, and first of all, from what they're saying, they had no idea about some of these things. Now, some of that I'm like, well, I mean, oh, maybe he's only getting lit at night and doing drugs, away from people, highly possible. But it's interesting to see Christians engage in cancel culture as well for its own people. I'm used to seeing that when, like, oh, people aren't going to carry my pillow for Mike Lindell at Kmart or whatever it is, so they're like, we'll never shop at Kmart again, or I guess they're not even around anymore, Walmart. But you have Christians going cancel, cut, delete, and I don't even know if I have a Newsboys CD, but I'm not going. But if I did, I'm not going to go out and have a Newsboys CD burning. I'm still going to listen to Newsboys. I mean, I don't listen to a ton of that, but if it came across my playlist on Spotify, I'm probably not going to skip unless I just don't like the song. So I guess do you how do you approach someone like this? Let's just say in your church, someone comes to you and says, "Hey, Dan, did you hear about John? No, what's going on with John? Well, John has been struggling with alcohol, and John, again, I don't know if you have a John on your leadership team. We're gonna say John's on your leadership team. Do you just call up John, or do you text John and say, John, you're fired, you off the leadership team, or do you approach it differently than what the culture is doing, the Christian culture is doing with Michael Tate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you would approach that one differently. A few things. I'll try to be really quick here. First, one Christian artist, I believe his name is Corey Asbury, already said that many other artists were well aware, or many people in the industry were well aware of Michael Tate's struggles. So that gives you some indication that it was sort of known, but not, I mean, and kind of swept under the rug a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, seeing his confession and reading it, and I did read it, it seemed somewhat very sincere. And I think as Christians, when a brother repents and confesses his sin in that way, I mean, it definitely for us lends itself to wanting to extend some grace and give that brother some time to walk out that repentance. Thirdly, as it relates to, like, do you cancel the brother? Do you cancel the music? Do you cancel the things? I mean, there are consequences to sin. I don't know that I would be reacting the way that the radio stations are acting right now. Like, they're drawing more attention to their kind of protesting
Right.
of a repentant brother, rather than maybe it would have been okay and acceptable for them to kind of like silently kind of pull back a little bit from playing his music for a while, and then maybe, here
Right.
and there sprinkle in some newsboys later on. There are other members in the group, and it sounds like, or seems like, maybe some of them possibly didn't know. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But as it relates to someone in the church, a conversation first, a conversation with this person, a conversation to try to figure out what's really going on, is of the utmost importance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think number one, no matter what has transpired for any person, Michael Tate, Nat Crawford, made up John Doe, you know, no matter what, we need to forgive, right? I mean, Jesus was abundantly clear. If you do not forgive others their trespasses, guess what? Neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. I don't think that's a conditional thing, right? But I think what's the point? We who have been forgiven fully must forgive others freely, right?
Yeah.
And I've been working through a book right now called Total Forgiveness, and it talks about what does it look like to truly forgive. And we don't have time to talk about that, but I mean, it's a multifaceted process. So I think that's one thing is, hey, at the end of the day, should you feel wronged by whoever, we are called to forgive because we've been forgiven completely. Second, should we cancel? I'm not a big fan of the cancel culture.
Right.
I think the better gospel way of doing things is Galatians 6:1. So if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual, you should aim to restore them, right?
Mm.
Restore them. And even when the Bible talks about confronting a sinful person, right, when two or three or more are gathered, right, context is it's about confronting somebody in discipline. What's always the purpose? It's always to restore the person, right? Not to condemn, not to shame, and not to humiliate, but to restore. And so, to your point, are there consequences? 100%. Is there accountability that's needed? Always. But we need to always remember to forgive, aim to restore, and we all have to remember, though, yes, we who are influencers and leadership, yada yada, we're not perfect. We are going to do things imperfectly from time to time. And so, will our leaders fail us? Yep. Will you fail your congregation? Yep. Will I fail mine? Yep. Will we fail our families? Yep. But when we do, let us have a posture of humility and brokenness. And hopefully, those who we've wronged or those who are alongside of us will aim to restore. So, to your point, is it tragic? Absolutely. Is there hope for him? Always. Is his future going to look different? Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's talk sermon prep. Like, what
It's
you
good. It's a
probably
great
talked,
transition. It's a
right?
great transition into sermon prep.
Yeah. There was no good. It's kind of like, if there's one area in my preaching that I probably need to improve on, it's my transitions. I'm kind of the Jesus said this, verse 37, right? Let's move on, right? We're just moving on. I don't, will the Pharisees respond with brokenness and humility? Let's see in verse 37. I don't do that, right? I just kind of go, verse 37. Right, moving on. So
Yeah.
anyway, so you talk to 100 different pastors, you're going to probably get around 95 different answers on what sermon prep looks like. So talk to me. What does an average week look like for you when you're going to engage the Bible?
For sermon prep, for
Yeah,
being a full time pastor with other responsibilities in the church, um, husband, one wife, 5 kids. Sermon prep looks around 20 hours, 15, 20, sometimes 25 hours max
yeah.
per week. Um, you just kind of sometimes it's far less than that depending on the week and the load of responsibilities during the week.
Mm-hmm.
So it can vary, but I would say on average somewhere around 15 to 20 hours a week.
Okay, yeah. But what does that, I mean, realistically, what does that look like for you? So, you guys, how far in advance do you and Mike have a sermon, a preaching calendar? Are you a year out? Are you 6 months out? Are you 18 months? Are you a day out? What is it?
I mean, the goal is to try to be a year out. It normally is more like 9 months to a year out. Um, but yeah, about that far out.
Gotcha. And that's typically what I try to do. Usually in the summertime, I'll start thinking ahead. So in those regards, I could be 18 months out, but usually summertime, I'm thinking forward. Okay, what's next? And you pivot as you need to, right? I kind of find, this is just my opinion. Summer months are a little more flexible in that, like, so for our church, we're going through the book of John. Well, John really takes up a year, but you do have some flexibility in there. And so our summer months look different. And originally I had one plan, and then I began to, talk with the other pastors. What do you guys think? And what does our church need right now? Oh, let's go this way. So there was some flexibility there as to what those in between sermons would look like. But then generally, though, we try to stick to a year out. Um, so you have your text in hand, and it's, do you work on Mondays, or do you take Mondays off?
Um, in the past, I've taken Mondays off. I'm trying to get away from Mondays off and trying to push it to the end of the week, but things keep coming up on Fridays and stuff. So yeah, so Mondays I typically take off.
Okay. So
Um,
Tuesday comes around, you've got your text that's coming up on Sunday. What does a normal week look like for sermon prep?
Yeah, so because I take Mondays off, I try not to have Tuesday be the first day I look at the text. So, even if I'm working on one sermon, I'm
Mm-hmm.
already at least reading ahead for the next text. Um, so by Sunday evening, before I go to bed, or some point during Sunday, I will read the text that I'm supposed to preach for the next week and start kind of wrestling with it a little bit and thinking through it. And so it helps me when I come back to it on Tuesday that there's a familiarity, there's a sense of where I may want to go with this text, and so then I start from there. So one other thing, I like to read it, jot down maybe one or two ideas about the text, and then I like to kind of move on. And usually, when I am doing some type of menial task or mindless task, that text is something I start, kind of ruminating on and thinking about while I'm doing that task. And there have been times where I've had to stop in the middle of the task and record something on my phone or write something down in my journal to so I don't forget it when I go back and approach the text.
So let me pause you there. So when you're reading a text, like, okay, you're going to preach on, let's just say John 9, right? Something I went through recently. Do you read it through in one translation? Do you read it through multiple translations? Like, what's that look like for you? And what do you preach out of?
Um, I preach out of the elect standard version, the ESV. I'm
Yes,
kidding.
sir. Yes, sir. Me too. Me too.
The English standard version. That's what we preach from. I typically don't read multiple translations. It depends on a text. If
Okay.
I'm dealing with a really difficult text, and I sense that maybe some of the words selected aren't necessarily capturing the thrust or the force of the original language, I might read a different translation then. But for the most part, I stick with that translation, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so for me, I will typically read through it in 3 to 4 different translations. I find it helpful for me. Like ESV is what I preach out of, but I also read the NASB as, again, that's a word for word, translation. And then I will move to sometimes a CSB or even maybe an NIV. I don't love the NIV, but it's okay. And then this is probably blasphemy, but that's okay. I always read it out of the NLT. Again, now the NLT is going to be more of a summary, right? Or,
Yeah.
paraphrase. But I really like sometimes how it can simplify what's being communicated. Now I'll go back in and really get into, my exegesis, but I really want to know um, what is, I guess, what's the simplest way of reading this text, and the NLT I find is really helpful for that. And I even think one of my favorite passages to preach on, and I read it more often than not, is Ephesians 2:1 through 10. Well, in Ephesians 2, you have, for we are God's workmanship, but the NLT says we are his masterpiece, and the Greek word's poema, so it's a poem, right? It's a piece of art. But
Mhm.
I've there's just certain things that resonate better, like workmanship. I would never use that in my modern uh, conversations. But masterpiece, like that, I get. So anyway, that's kind of how I start off as well. Find a text, or in our case, we know what the text is going to be, and I'll take some time and read through it in several different versions. Maybe make a few notes of, okay, here's what the NLT says, here's what the NASB says, and then I'll start to really dive in. Like, what are the things you're looking for in a text? Like when you're reading through it, like, are you looking for repetition? Are you looking for buzzwords or unusual words? Like what are you trying to look for in a text?
All of the above, the things that you have referenced there. Yeah, if there's repetition, if there are certain phrases that it keeps hanging out there in the text. I mean, but all of that serves a purpose, right? I mean, and the purpose of that is to kind of um, help me to understand the emphasis of the text, what the original author was trying to, or what the original author was communicating to his original audience. I really want to identify that emphasis. I want to identify that original intent, and the repetition, the phrases that seem to be repeated, or maybe they parallel one another. Those sort of things kind of help me to grasp the emphasis and the thrust of it.
Who do or what was your go-to textbook for hermeneutics? Do you remember in seminary or Bible school?
Oh, um, it was a Richard Pratt book. He gave us stories. Was the textbook we used for hermeneutics when I was in school,
Okay.
but I can't say that I've leaned on that a whole lot. His textbook really helped with the Old Testament, is what I would say. It
Okay.
was tremendous in terms of helping to understand the Old Testament.
Yeah, we my go-to has been
Yeah.
Duval Hayes Grasping the Text, I think is what it's called. I don't know if you've ever used
Okay.
that before, but I was having a conversation recently with someone, and they were kind of talking like, how do you study the Bible? And so I guess one's helpful, like, how do you define hermeneutics? We've used the term hermeneutics here, but people are like, who's Herman and why is he new? Right? So So how would you describe hermeneutics to someone in your congregation?
It's the science of scriptural interpretation.
Yep.
It's your approach to interpreting the scriptures.
Okay, very good. That's what I would say. So you pass that test. What about, I use the term exegesis, right? That's a term we throw around as master theologians that we are. But what is exegesis, and what's the other word? Eisegesis?
Eisegesis,
So what's
yeah.
the
So
difference? And
yeah,
what
I
is
mean,
Jesus doing with this stuff?
in the Greek, right? And the Greek language has such an influence on our English language. Um, kind of the prefix, it's similar to exit, right? Like an exit door or an exit ramp. So exegesis would be what we are able to pull out of the text in terms
Hmm.
of its meaning, and we're looking at, in terms of exegesis, kind of a smaller portion of scripture, where hermeneutics would, I would say, would kind of apply to your approach to all of scripture, your commitment there, and they're related. I would say eisegesis is the bad one. It's the bad guy. Exegesis is what we pull out. Eisegesis is what we push in to the text. So
So here's a funny-ish story. So years ago, I was asked to preach
yeah.
at church, and I wasn't given a text, but I was given the title of the sermon that I was going to be teaching on, and it was "How to Conquer the Rat Race Before the Rat Race Conquers You." So that was my assignment, and and I remember going, I don't think I've ever seen that in the Bible before.
Yeah.
What do I do with this? And would you say that could be an example of eisegesis, right? You're taking, this is what
Yes.
I'm looking to find, and you're gonna punch that. And I don't remember what I taught on exactly. I think I found a passage in Daniel that had some type of like, how do you run the race in a way? I don't remember, but anyway. So that's really important. So exegesis, you're exposing, you're pulling out from the text what it means, and
Right.
that's the good guy, as you said. So then I'm going to go back to where we were saying about biblical interpretation and hermeneutics. So like I said, I had Duval Hayes grasping the text, and they had a 4-step process. So I don't know if this is similar to what you had. I'd love to hear what your process was like when you were learning how to do this. But step number one for this was grasping the text in their town. So number one, you're reading James, and James 1, James, the servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings. So number one is, this letter was written to a people from a person inspired by God. Therefore, when the people receiving this letter, what was James' intent? What is the meaning? And how would they have understood it? Like, what was going on in their world, in their context? So step number one is grasping the text. So that's number one. Is that kind of your first step as well? Like, hey, who's this to? What's happening? Why is it being written? What's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah, similar. We speak of, you're talking about context,
Correct.
and
There you go.
which is really important for exegesis.
Yep.
So, um, but similar. Yeah, we talk about context. Go ahead.
Yeah. So step one would be context. Step number two is what they call crossing the principalizing bridge. There is a bridge that we have to cross from the original writing to today. We are not dispersed Jewish Christians today. At least I am not. I'm a Gentile, right? And I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I have a car, and I have a house, and I have a PlayStation 5, and I like to shop at Walmart. I don't like to shop at Walmart, but I shop at Walmart. So the world is different. So there's a bridge we have to cross from our world to theirs. Similarly, when you go from the where we are today to the Old Testament, the bridge is much farther. right? It's a very different world. Now you're in ancient Israel and you've got temple sacrifices, and it's a bigger bridge. So you have to
Yeah.
cross the bridge from where you're at to where they were at. So you have context, the bridge, and then you get to the principles. What are the principles that we can extract? There may be several, maybe one, but either way, there's a principle you can pull out from the text, which leads to step 4, application. What does this have to do with me? And that's where uh, you could have many applications, right, to the principle or principles, and that's maybe unique to a people or to the individual. But that's kind of the 4-step process of, okay, what's the meaning, the context, right? What's happening, the bridge we have to cross, the principles, and then the application. So that's the process I broadly go through, which would also apply to any Bible study, right? You
Yeah.
because the one thing we've, I think, said in this program from time to time is, never ask a person, what does the text mean to you? Because that's a terrible wrong, because it doesn't mean what that has nothing to do with it. It's what's the text mean. So anyway, that's the 4-step process that I go through. So what's yours look like? Um, is it different, same, similar? What's happening here?
Yeah. Um, so first, yeah, I mean, there's some similarities, different terminology is what I would say. First thing we like to start with, and this is influenced largely by the Simeon Trust, which
Mm.
is it's just a program, workshops for preachers, especially preachers who have no seminary training. That this workshop is designed to kind of train your your average preacher to be able to exposit the word faithfully, and uh, and so it's a very simple and effective approach to sermon prep that we use. So the first thing we try to do is identify, if we're given a passage, we're given a text, right? You start with the text, and what we'll do is, like, so you have the text here. You can just imagine a dot, and then you have the text, and then you have us now, right? But you can't just draw a straight line from the text to us now. That's eisegesis, right? So you kind of, like you said, you got to take the long way around, and we complete the square
Right.
in order to get there. So we start with the text. We try to identify the structure of the text. How is it structured? And based on that structure, what is the emphasis? And then from the emphasis, we're trying to identify what might be the author's main argument. Okay, and then so um, once we've identified the author's main argument based on the emphasis. Well, let me back. So you get the structure, you get the emphasis. Then you look at context, which we divide into literary context, um, biblical context. Literary context is like, where does this passage fit? Like, is it the introduction of the book? Is it chapter 2? Or what was chapter 1? And then what's chapter 3? So that's the literary context, helps you to understand that particular passage you're dealing with. And then, is there some historical context we need to keep in mind? And then finally, some cultural context that we keep in mind. So all that stuff kind of helps once we identify the structure, jump into that context conversation, and then now we're able to identify the author's main argument.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get that, we want to go back to the text and do some theological reflection
Mm.
and thinking about um, the context of the gospel. How does this interact with the finished work of Christ? Where we in in terms of biblical theology, in terms of the cross and when Christ has come, where are we on that in this particular text? And so we want to do some theological reflection, because we don't want to simply just preach a good sermon that a non-Christ believing Jew could amen and say good job,
Oh.
and then move on, right? We want to make sure that there's some Christ in the sermon, and then after we do the theological reflection, Then we start thinking about the argument that we want to make from the passage.
Got it.
And that argument should be somewhat similar to the author's argument, but it should also have your audience in mind. And kind of some sub points from there would be, how should a Christian think about this in terms of application, and how should the non-Christian in your church setting think about this
Hmm.
argument and this passage that you're preaching?
Hmm.
And so those are helpful content fillers and questions we put in as we're, thinking about the sermon. And then the last step is adornment. How will I present it? How will I package this? And
Hmm.
you spend a little bit of time there, and what you don't want to do is emphasize creativity over clarity. You really want to demonstrate a clarity, and that clarity is what makes the message more palatable. Like you want to argue with great clarity and conviction,
Hmm.
um, as you're presenting the message. But if you rely on creativity, you may wow your listeners, but they may go home and say, "Well, it was really impressive. We just don't know what he said. We don't know what it means. We don't know how to apply it. It's just really catchy, though. He's really crafty.
Right.
Um, but great clarity helps you to see the text. It makes what you want is your listener to say, "Oh, I see that too. I see it as
Hmm.
well. I see it there." You want them to be able to say that, and then you want them to be thinking along with you. So as you're delivering the text, they're thinking in their head, well, what about this? And then, oh, he's addressing it.
Huh.
And so, now you see that your preaching is, it's connecting with the hearts of your people. You're showing them how to read the Bible. They're seeing Christ in the text. They're understanding what the text is requiring of them.
Hmm.
And hopefully that leads to transformation in their life. Does it
Right.
always happen that way? No.
No, of course
But
not.
that's the goal, right?
Yeah. So
So
we actually go through the exact same process for our hermeneutic. You gave a very, I think, you put a little more meat on the bones, right? Which I think was really helpful. And I even thought what you said about the literary style is an important one, right? Because not all books or letters are the same, right?
mhm.
Song of Solomon is different than Galatians. Galatians is different than the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is surely different than Genesis. Genesis is surely different than Revelation, and so on. So I think that's really helpful for us all as we dig into the Bible. Okay, so you've read through the passage. Or if you're Nat Crawford, you read through 4 or 5 different versions of the passage, and then is it time? And you've written down a few observations, maybe some key words, some key phrases, maybe some questions. Then is that when you turn to your commentaries, or do you just make it up as you go?
No, man, no,
Look at
no,
all
no.
those books behind you. Those got to be
Yeah,
some commentaries, right?
yeah. Most of them are. Most of
Yeah.
them are. Um, I want to nail down my main argument first. If
Okay.
I get that,
Yep.
so what I mean by your main argument, I mean if you were to bump into someone Saturday night and they ask you, "What are you preaching on?" Can you summarize that in a short phrase, one sentence, maybe
Right.
two? Like
Yep.
I want to be able to nail that down before I do anything else. If I'm struggling to nail that down, then I'll go to the commentaries to kind of help me see something
Gotcha.
that maybe I didn't see.
Right.
But really, for me, the commentaries only help. They're only useful when I am trying to apply the content in some of the sub points,
Okay.
if I need some help there. But that's when I go to the commentaries. They're the last thing I want to go to. I need to nail down this argument. Once I get the argument, I write a simple outline, and then I go to the commentaries.
Gotcha.
You know.
Interesting. Yeah, because I actually go to the commentaries before I get to to the argument, because I want to make
Mm.
sure I'm going to get Haddon Robinson called it the big idea, right? Wasn't that his
Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
idea? Um,
Great
there,
book too, by the way.
yeah, great book. There's a speaker training I went through years ago called SCORE, and they called it the objective statement, right? That was their big thing, right? So this is what you need. This is, if anyone, it's the elevator speech. What's this about? So you're right. We just come at it from you do it on the front end, I do it on the back end. Real quick, because I know some people are gonna be like, man, commentaries would be really helpful. Like, what do you recommend for a commentary? Or is there a certain series you really like, or is it, hey, you take the best of any one book of the Bible and build from there? Like, how do you approach it?
I mean, it depends on the person and their circumstances, what's available to them. Um, you've got if they don't have a lot of resources, the Matthew Henry commentaries are free and they are really solid.
Yep.
Um, John Calvin's commentary is underrated, very underrated, I would say. You've got Blue Letter Bible that can
Mm-hmm.
give them some help there as well. So that's what I would say for those who don't have many resources. If you've got resources and you're looking for commentaries, I mean, my commentary was tailored for me through Logos.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Bible software. And so, I mean, I type in the prompts of the things that I'm looking for, the convictions that I have,
Yep.
and they build the commentary around those things. So those are a few options I would give to people.
Yeah,
I,
that are
and
free.
the- Personally, the older the commentary, the older the theologian, I'm probably more inclined
Okay.
to read it. I find that the newer guys, they've just read the older guys, so I'll just go back and
Go
read
back and read
the
the older guys.
I'll just go back and read the original source.
Yeah, you're smarter than me. I can't handle the old guys as much. I need someone to just speak in my common day language. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple recommendations I have for people. So I don't know. This is how I think about commentaries. I don't know if this is how you think about them, but I put them in three broad categories: technical, pastoral, devotional. Those are kind of like
Mhm.
three big broad categories. Technical, you're going to get into the Greek or Hebrew, and it's very wordy,
Mhm.
sometimes really dry, but you'll go places that the other ones won't go into. You have pastoral, which are really written for the pastors to like help you understand like what's the main thrust of this verse, and maybe here's some things to think about. And then you have devotional, which I would just call them very accessible. They're not real deep, but they'll communicate what they think you need to know, and maybe even application to a certain degree. So kind of three or four that I really like. If I just want like, hey, what's an accessible commentary? I really like the Wearsby commentary. Again, I don't always agree with Wearsby, but Wearsby knew how to turn a phrase. Like
Mhm.
he was a very much a 3 point guy, which I'm not. But I always like how he could, you know, one of his phrases that's meant a lot to me recently. God, you don't know what the future holds, but you know who holds the future. Like that's a Wearsby. Like that's Wearsby to a T. But accessible, easy. Um, I this is like my go-to personally, just for the entire New Testament, is my John MacArthur one. I think he does a good job of digging into the Greek a little bit, but also comes at it from I think a little more pastoral role. And my other one I really like is the Zondervan exegetical commentary. I don't know if you ever use this, Dan, but one of the things I really like about it is if you want to get to the main idea or the big idea right away, they actually put it in here. They say like, here's the big idea from this passage, and then they begin to break it down. But ultimately, what I tell people is there's a website called bestcommentaries.com. There you can go and you can look up the Gospel of John, and you'll get the commentaries categorized and ranked. And there's various reasons why they rank them that way. But I find it really helpful. So I basically always try to have a technical, a pastoral, and a devotional to read through at some level, just so I can think about it. Okay, one, to make sure I'm understanding the text biblically, but if
Yeah.
I'm the listener and I'm thinking, what does this have to do with me? I run a car shop or I work at Walmart. Like, what does this have to do with me? I think coming at it from those angles is really helpful. So those are
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
my resources I really like.
I mean,
Okay.
like, if you got finances, I mean, I love the Tyndale
Yep.
commentary, Tyndale New
Absolutely.
Testament commentaries. I mean, those are great.
Yep.
But kind of what we do. We do have the MacArthur Bible commentary here as well. But I think if what you highlighted there, I think something that's important just for the average guy. I think every Christian man should have a good study Bible.
That's exactly
And
what I was going to say next. Yep.
yeah, so there you go. Go ahead. Say what you were going to say about that.
No, that's it. That's what I was going to say. Get a study Bible.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you do
Yeah.
you have one you really like?
I have several, and I go. My daily is actually it's very reasonably priced. I got it from Mardell's. Is ESV Student Study Bible.
Okay.
Um, and I think maybe I paid $20 for it,
Oh,
if
sweet.
that.
Yep.
But I have some more extensive ones. My wife tends to grab like the really big ones because it's more detailed,
Mhm.
and that's fine. I let her enjoy reading those because I've got all the other commentaries on my iPad and on the shelf here at church.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I one of my defaults is I just have the Life Application Bible, which has been helpful. I always recommend the John MacArthur Study Bible. And if you're a nerd like me, one of them I like to have on hand, and I don't use it a ton, but I have an apologetic study Bible. I have a
hmm
background in apologetics, and so every once in a while, I just like to think about from how do you defend this from a Christian worldview, and how do you approach the skeptic out there. So those are three that I really like. Okay, so you read through the text, you let it marinate, you find a big idea, you then get into the commentaries. Okay, now it's writing day. Are you a manuscript guy? Are you a notes guy? Are you an outline guy? What does that look like for you as you've now studied and now you're getting ready to not deliver yet, but you're getting ready to craft your sermon?
most consistently, I'm just an outline guy
Okay.
with maybe a few quotes or references in the outline. If there are a few phrases or points that I think critical, I don't want to mess this up. I'll type those out. But
Mm-hmm.
mostly an outline guy.
That's interesting and the good. I when I was in seminary at Moody, you could only use an outline, but I manuscript everything. I don't hang on my manuscript, but I I think in today's culture, we should always be concerned about what we say and how we say it, right?
Correct.
But I also, because we live in a digital world where everything is documented, I really want to make sure that I've thought through every word. So I will manuscript everything. And the other part too is how long do you preach on average? 45 minutes?
Usually between that's about 35
Okay.
to 40 minutes. And I'm on the longer end at SOAR, most consistently around 35 to 40.
Right.
Most of the guys are around 30, and so I get complaints for being long.
This conference I was just at, there's a guy there by the name of Larry Osborne he's kind of one of the goats of the
Yeah.
E3 association, right, for various reasons. But what's crazy is they are a church of like I think 15 or 20,000 in San Diego, and it's not, it isn't seeker sensitive. It's seeker no, it's, how would he put it? I They will preach a text and an expository message, and their messages are 55 to 60 minutes long. But what they do really well, I think, is that they're aware that their audience is going to be very broad. And so
Mm,
one of the things I've heard him say this twice now because I've been able to be in two different conferences with him, is he says, when you're talking to your church and to your audience, there are things that you can do to help people bring them along because we live in a biblically illiterate world, and you always have to recognize that maybe 5% of your church are going to be some type of skeptic or agnostic or whatever, which who knows on the percentage. But he goes, don't say things like remember. And that was like, that's a really hard thing to stop saying. Hey, remember back when we said that last week? Because one, they may not have been here, and two, even if they were, they probably won't remember. And third, if you say, hey, remember when Moses, assume people
mhm.
don't know who Moses is, and if they do know who Moses is, they probably don't have him right. So think about that. Don't use the term remember, and make a 5-second detour. Hey, there's this guy named Moses, and he did this, and he said this, and that's what we're talking about here. So I thought that was really good. Okay, so you bullet point it, then I manuscript it. It's it's Friday afternoon. You're going home. Do you not look at the text till Sunday morning? Do you spend a little bit of time in it every day? Like, what's that look like for you?
I probably visit the text every day,
Yeah.
sometimes multiple times during the day. And then I will Saturday, Friday and Saturday, I will write
Okay.
just to get some sense of clarity in my mind about the text, and then I'll spend all Sunday morning again reading what I've written
Mm-hmm.
and reviewing my outline and praying. A lot of prayer, a lot of prayer. In fact,
In fact, we
we were
should probably notice. We probably should have said at the beginning, and which is
yeah,
true. But how
yeah,
terrible is that? Yeah, we don't pray until the end.
yeah. The problem is we're assuming that you know that we pray, and you know
Yeah.
what they say when you assume, right? You make you know what out of
Yeah.
all of
Right.
us.
I haven't heard
So
that phrase before, so thank you for
um,
enlightening me.
So yeah, I mean, so you definitely start with prayer, and but prayer all the way through, prayer and meditating on it. Sunday morning, I'm definitely laboring more in prayer and reflection on it, and it's helpful for me to think about how these words are going to land on various types of people in our congregation
Yep.
from a pastoral sense. Like that helps me to have more of a pastoral touch to the teaching when I'm thinking about we're covering this subject, and this is how close that's going to cut to this person's life. And I
Mm,
don't here's what I don't want that person to get from this, but here's what I hope they see from this. And making those kind of insightful insertions into the teaching. So
yeah. So you, um, for me, I will unfortunately touch the text in my manuscript every day. I will, on average, read through it once it's constructed, probably anywhere from 6 to 10 times. Back when I was first starting, I was told verbally read out loud your message 8 to 10 times. Back in the day, I could get away with it. I can't now because of time. And again, that's
Mhm.
just not for everybody. That's just what I was instructed. But so would used to do that. But for sure now, I'll read through it about 6 to 8 to 10 times between time it's written to the time that I deliver, and I will revise. Unfortunately, on Sunday morning, but I really like what you said. You spent a lot of time in prayer. My prayer on a Sunday morning is, Lord, may I be a hollow reed. May they see you and not me. May they be the words that you need declared, and may their hearts be softened to it. And that's my general prayer every
Mm,
time. I don't. It's not about me. It's about your word. May your word be heard clearly, and may I
yeah.
get out of the way. Um, and that's where. So how about this? We probably want to land the plane here pretty soon. But so someone comes up to you after a service, and I'm gonna give you two different scenarios. How do you respond?
Uh-huh.
Dan, that was the greatest sermon I've ever heard. What do you say to that person?
Whew.
Darn right it was.
Yeah, right. I was like, man, hey, I'm thankful that the Lord used that sermon to, you know,
Yeah.
open your eyes to something, but it's about the word. It's about the word.
All right.
It's about him, you know.
Good answer. Good answer. How about this? You said this. I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. Has anyone ever told you that? I had a guy come up to me once and be like, "You said this, and I want to let you know you're wrong." How do you respond to that?
Um, Depending on when and where this happens, I'm happy to have that conversation. Like, yeah, okay, all right, I'm human. I mean, I could be wrong here, but let's stay on the line of the text. Let's make sure we have that conversation around the text, not around how you feel or how what was said made you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that happens, man. I've not had that happen, but I have had individuals get up in the middle of my sermon and walk out and leave angry at me. So
Well, when I come and visit your church one of these days, I will stand up. Maybe I'll throw you a curveball. Stand up and throw you something and see how you respond. Would that be good? Would you like
Yeah,
that?
man, we need more participation. We need
Okay.
more interaction with the sermon. We need more amens and preach
Oh,
on, preach it,
preach.
that kind of thing. We need a little clap. We need an organ.
Yeah.
We don't have it. Mike told me, our other lead pastor here at SOAR, he told me they sold the organ when they, early on in the
Oh
history of the
well.
church. I was like, man, we need somebody on that organ when I'm preaching, you
Organs are
know.
very popular in different forms still. So you get the right guy or girl on it, and it can really enhance the worship. All right. So I guess one of the last few questions for you is, what are your what texts books have really impacted you in your preaching? Like, I'll throw you a couple of mine, like some that have been really helpful. I won't say that um,
Yeah,
I go back and read them a ton, but like, and I never say his name right. Brian Chappell, uh,
yeah.
Christ-centered preaching was one for me.
Mhm.
I read Haddon Robinson's book on preaching, and I appreciated it, but I've never been a 3-point guy. Tried it, and it just didn't fit for me real well, which is perfectly fine. I like I think it was Eugene Lowry's The Homiletical Plot. I thought that was really helpful for me as well. And then obviously the Duval Hayes Hermeneutics book. So those are kind of the four that I've really marinated on periodically. How about you?
Yeah. So I love the Haddon Robinson. Um, I don't have a problem with the 3 points. I can do three or two or or one or whatever, depending on the text. In my
Yep.
opinion, is what kind of influences that. Um, so I like Haddon Robinson. I like David Helm's short little book in the 9 Marks series on expositional preaching, which is
Okay.
really good. He's got some illustrations in there that are just killer, man, on like proper exegesis and the difference between sound exegesis and eisegesis. Um, um, uh, this one is going to throw you a little bit, but and our
Joel Osteen's
audience.
book,
No,
Your Best Life
uh,
Now.
Andy Stanley has a book called, I believe, Communicating
This is terrible.
or
Keep going
point,
though.
right? And so what I took away from that book, obviously I don't agree with Andy Stanley's theology or whatnot, but he talks about the importance of transitions. He talks
Mm.
about being clear on your how to make your main point clear. There's some things I would disagree with on how you make that main point clear, but the general thrust of the it's called communication for change, I believe.
I'm literally
Uh,
writing this down because I'm going to buy it.
yeah, it was
Hmm. Cool.
the technical components, the mechanical aspects of communication. I think he does handle that well.
Hmm.
It's exegesis isn't necessarily his strength, but that component he handled well. And the last book is funny. It's Why Johnny Can't Preach by Gordon T. David.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah,
Oh,
Why Johnny Can't Preach it's an insightful book and
wow.
the greatest title ever, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes you well go, why Johnny can't preach? Why, what?
Yeah.
So,
And
so
you got some Martin Lloyd Jones. There's a book on preaching and preachers, but there's also like you can hear some of the audio on that I think is really helpful. And then Jay Adams, what's the name of his book on preaching? Preaching with Purpose is the name. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a solid book too. It's definitely got a pastoral component to it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, and I think it may have been clear, we haven't necessarily used this term a whole lot on this podcast today, but both Dan and I would be, I think, what you consider expository preachers. Again, word line by line, verse by verse. Do you think topical preaching has a place in the church?
I do. I absolutely do. I think being an expositor is an instinct that you have.
Yep.
If it's not really an instinct of yours, then I think when you're topical, when you branch into a topic, it'll show. that you're really not committed to the principles of exposition. So
Mm.
you can go to a Christian conference with a lineup of expositors, and the message, which is largely topical, right,
Yep.
is
Sure.
going to be really sound, and it's going to make sense from the context of that passage and tie into the larger theme. And then you can go to a Christian conference where the guys say they're committed to expository preaching and teaching, and then they throw this conference, and of course they've got their topics, and it's pretty clear that they're not expository,
Mm.
because all it took was for them to be given a passage. And so what their preparation was simply that passage and the topic of the conference, rather than the book, the chapter, the context of that passage. That's how you know you're dealing with an expositor, man.
Yeah.
You hand them a passage, and they're committed to the entire book, chapter,
Right.
context of that thing before they address
Mm.
the subject.
Well, I definitely agree. Topical is a valid way of doing it, but even when I do topical, I typically do an expository message inside of it. But no, that's really good. Okay, last question is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received regarding preaching? Whether it was someone from like you read it in a book and you're like, that's golden, or someone came up to you after a sermon and said, hey, consider this.
Yeah, it would be, I forget the exact quote, like from Tim Keller, um, something to the effect of, don't worry, your first 200 sermons are going to be lousy anyway. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's funny.
I mean, just embracing that you're growing. Um, one of the older guys is a retired pastor in our church. I mean, he has a gentle way of letting you know, hey, I mean, they can't always be, they're not always going to be A plus or excellent,
Right.
after you preach a sermon,
Mm.
so it's and that's something a pastor needs to hear, because it's about the steady plowing. It's not about being some superstar, being Jesus to your people. It's
Yeah.
being faithful.
Right.
Are you through your own example demonstrating your dependence upon Christ by faithfully plowing and being faithful to preach the text week in, week out.
Mm.
And sometimes when it's not your best, being able to humbly acknowledge that, and when it is, give honor and praise to God for how He worked through it. So,
Uh,
one other thing on the topical thing, like, just to be clear, topical sermons should not be a steady diet of your church, right? It
mm.
should be consistently books of the Bible. But it's okay, I would say. Some guys would vehemently disagree, but I think it's okay to every now and then,
Yeah.
cover a topical thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think two of the things that stick out to me. I mean, number one, I totally agree with what Tim Keller said. I even said, think that's generous. It's probably like the first 1,000 sermons, or I'll
Yeah.
still go. But I remember the first one I ever gave. It was in India, and looking back, that was such a pile of dog doo doo. And not only did you have like my inexperience, but you had translation in between. And I'm quoting Black Eyed Peas songs, and like I remember looking over at Beamon. Beamon's going. So that was terrible. But two things. One, I remember Chuck Swindoll. He goes,
Mhm.
the only line I memorize out of my sermon is my opening line.
Mm.
And I think it's so important for pastors to, one, take off the plane. The takeoff has to be swift and clean. And I do it from the Eugene Lowry perspective, where you are trying to cause disequilibrium. So that opening line has to cause people to stop and feel uncomfortable. So a couple weeks back, I had one that was, God, are you mad at me? And that was my opening line.
Mm.
And then it was, God, are you mad at me? And then, have you ever asked that question? I have, and I do. So memorize that first line, which was really helpful, and that's what I've done. The other thing was, after a sermon I gave, my lead pastor, Mark Brunot, came to me and he goes, what you said was accurate. What you said was truthful, but it wasn't pastoral. And I remember thinking, what does this old, loony know about this? But he was exactly right. how we communicate the truths of Scripture has to be full of compassion and love, and never sacrifice truth for love, and never sacrifice love for truth. They have to go hand in hand. And so when we communicate with our people, are we communicating with a pastor's or a shepherd's heart? And that was, I mean, really hard to hear at first, but it was such good advice to really help me think, okay, when I say this, how will they receive it? And is it going to move them closer to God, create a deeper understanding of Scripture, and love Him more? And if not, what do we need to do to adjust that a little bit? So those are two of the best pieces of advice I ever had. So, all right, my friend. Well, we are out of time, but we have unlimited time in the world of podcasting. We both have responsibilities. Sunday is coming for you, and I need to get my sons to a neurology appointment. Have fun, Nat Crawford. But I just want to say how much I appreciate you, Dan, your heart for the gospel, your heart for the word. And again, it's so fun to know we live in Lincoln, Nebraska. Our churches are on opposite sides of the city, and yet God has us partnering together for the sake of the gospel. No competition, right? No trying to like steal or like, hey, what's this guy doing over here? Man, we are literally linked arms for the sake of the gospel, preaching His word and praying that lives are transformed and souls saved. So what a pleasure it is to watch you and listen to you do what you've been called to do in your context. And it's just a pleasure to do this podcast with you.
Amen. I thank you for that, Nat. You've been a really good friend. I really appreciate you. Glad you reached out. How many years ago was that? 4,
Oh
5
man.
years,
And I remember you
maybe?
were like, what does this guy want? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But
cool
no,
that
man,
you're
I'm
like,
thankful. I'm thankful for you, and you hit the nail on the head, man. That's it. That's what it's about, man.
right.
Um, God be glorified, and in and through our lives, our ministries, our friendship, and our families and ministry, all of the above, man. Thank you for this, and what a great show.
Yeah, well, great show. And we'll do it again here in 2 weeks. So we will see you guys on the next Faith in Real Life podcast. Take care.